Hello and welcome to the Pink Pineapple Podcast, where we peel back femtech and take a bite out of more than just the juicy bits.
I'm Claudia, and I'm Emma's partner in Pineapple for this adventure.
And I'm Emma. Together, we're exploring women's health across the full timeline, from first periods to menopause and everything in between.
Each week, we'll dive into the stories, science, and software shaping the future of women's health, from hormones to hardware, fertility to femtech founders.
Think of us as your slightly nosy best friends who just happen to be doctors with a healthy curiosity for innovation.
We'll be chatting to clinicians, creators, and changemakers, and yes, asking the questions you actually want answered.
So whether you're out for a walk, cooking dinner, or hiding from your to-do list, join us as we get curious, clinical, and occasionally controversial.
This is the Pink Pineapple Podcast,
where women's health meets what's next.
Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Pink Pineapple Podcast. And today we've got the fabulous Anna O'Sullivan. She's the co-founder of CensHERship, a venture that tackles bias in women's health and femtech. And she's also the founder of Future FemHealth, which is a global newsletter-first platform that highlights innovation in women's health. So welcome, Anna. It's lovely to see you.
Thanks, Claudia, and thanks, Emma. Brilliant to be here.
And as usual, we're going to kick off with our pineapple of the day. Here she is. She's got a tiara because I thought today, it's been a while since we jazzed up a pineapple properly. And I've slapped my son's really dirty football glove across its face. There it is with sound effects for, oh God, the tiara's fallen off, with sound effects for full effect. Just to give us a rough idea about what we're talking about today, because we are, of course, talking about censorship. And Anna, it would be lovely to hear more in your own words. For listeners who haven't come across censorship before, could you give us a brief rundown of what it is?
Of course, thanks. So censorship is here to level the playing field for women's health businesses and content. And we, as you mentioned, we're tackling that bias and censorship across social media platforms, large online platforms, and also financial services. What began, I guess, as a small little research project, essentially about 18 months ago, where we set out to do a small survey and find out what was happening with social media censorship, has basically exploded into a full-blown advocacy initiative that we are both dedicating, myself and my co-founder Cleo, a lot of time and energy to, and absolutely love working on. So together with Cleo, we've had our research now published in The Times, The Guardian. It's been featured on Women's Hour. We've managed to submit 9 formal complaints under the EU's Digital Services Act about the social media censorship. 3 of those have now been submitted to Ofcom as well. We've published a white paper, and our open letter, which called for everyone to join us in talking about this issue, has been signed by over 600 leaders in women's health. And we've also gratefully partnered with global brands such as Essity to support their efforts as well. We feel like we're just getting started. There's a long road ahead, but we're great to be here.
It sounds like you're making some kind of amazing waves in the space, Anna. I'm just wondering, you said it kind of started out as like a research project. What was it that had inspired you in the first place to start looking at this area?
Cleo and I met over a networking lunch in femtech, and Cleo Wood, my co-founder, she's an author, a writer. She has her own company, And Breathe Wellbeing. And as a women's health advocate, a lot of her social media was about celebrating women, women's health, well-being, and her own body positivity as well. And she was experiencing this censorship on her own platforms. You know, she'd post maybe a reel of her in a bikini talking about being a mum of 2 and the postpartum phase, and it would get taken down, or it would just be shown to no one. And we were talking about this, and then myself, I'd set up Future FemHealth as a newsletter about innovation in women's health. And so I'd started to unpick some of these systemic barriers that were happening in the women's health space, you know, the funding gap, the data gap, things that we're very familiar with. And I'd heard founders and seen founders talking about this social media censorship as well. So we sort of had this good connection point. And then she said to me a few months later after that lunch, she was like, do you want to just do a survey and kind of see what happens and see what we can discover? And that was February last year. We got over, I think initially it was 80 responses to that first survey, but it's now grown to nearly 200 responses. And that's what kind of kickstarted the work. And just through speaking to so many different organizations, the charity sector, medical professionals that are creating content, advocates, we just realized how deep this issue is and what more needed to be done.
So when you talk about censorship, what kinds of censorship or suppression have you seen in women's health content? Have all these people complained about? Could you give us some examples?
Yes, sure. And I think this is part of the issue itself, is that it's what you see and what you don't see. So I think what people might have seen is they'll be familiar with seeing a post where the word sex is written SEGGS or S3X, or there's a image talking about women's health and it's like a papaya or a peach or something to represent what we're actually trying to talk about. Or there's just topics that are kind of skipped entirely, like postpartum healing or prolapse. Or so that's where people are so unaware of what's happening because it's invisible. And so when we think about social media censorship, it's legitimate content about women's health that is either taken down by the social media platforms, it's suppressed by them, so it's not really shared to more than your followers or fewer than your followers. It could be restricted or it could be altered. So we've seen cases where literally on an ad, the word pregnancy has been crossed out by the platform because they won't allow a sensitive term like pregnancy to be used. So essentially, it's the algorithms that are deciding what we all see in our feeds, shaping our viewpoint of the world. And our evidence has shown that women's health content is disproportionately restricted on the social media platforms. And to share a few more examples to bring it to life, you could be an educator who is helping women to navigate post C-section scarring, and you want to be on Instagram, showing methods for massage, for example, and those posts are either having a sensitive warning or they're being taken down. As I mentioned, a pregnancy pillow business where you can't use the word pregnancy, you have to call yourself a 3-in-1 pillow, which is just completely meaningless. You might be a charity campaign, so the Eva pill, when they are trying to talk about vulva cancer, the hashtag vulva cancer was banned from use until they appealed it and it was reinstated. And even a recent one I saw, you might have seen a statue of a postpartum woman outside a hospital in London. A photograph of that had a sensitive warning placed on it on Instagram that it may upset viewers to see that. And this is what we're dealing with. And what I'd say is, they are sort of some of the individual examples, but the statistics bear that out. So 95% of the people that we've heard through our surveys have experienced this form of censorship. 90% have experienced that on Instagram. That is by far the most problematic channel, many having multiple issues within a year. And the result is that over half of the people that we've spoken to self-censor. So they do that thing where they either don't talk about a topic, they use some sort of euphemism, or they just talk in very vague and general terms.
And I mean, to put it, I guess, because it's complete madness. Obviously, to us, it just seems like complete madness to not be able to use the word pregnancy because it's sensitive. I can't get my head around that. So to put it simply, like, what is the logic here? Is it the fact that if you've got breasts and if you've got a vagina, if you've got lady bits, it is deemed as sexual first, and therefore it is hidden and banned because we don't want, of course, to be sharing lots of very inappropriate sexual content. So it's almost like anything to do with women is porn first before it is anything health information, educational products.
That is certainly, I think, one of the major contributing factors. And what I'd say firstly is that we can't possibly know exactly what's going on within the social media platforms, how they build their algorithms, how they manage those. I'd really encourage anyone to read the Sarah Wynne Williams book, Careless People, because she's the ex Meta chief, and it's just a brilliant behind the scenes of how some of this all works. But to go back to your question, I think we identified four main contributing factors to this. So certainly the one that you've mentioned is top of the list, stuff that goes up that is, say, an image of someone breastfeeding. There's absolutely no nudity on show there, but it's classed as porn adjacent, adult content, nudity, and is restricted even when it's in an educational setting, and that is simply a mistake. Secondly would be sort of the biased enforcement of rules. So you can imagine a piece of content is taken down as a mistake, but then you've got a moderator on the other side or the AI on the other side that is not perhaps well informed about women's health to know how to adapt and see the nuance in things. There's also unclear guidelines. So when you look through the guidelines from Meta, etc., it talks about sex and nudity, but there's no real detail under that to really give people the comfort that their content can be shown. And then I suppose finally is like these really deep cultural issues as well about how women's health is just seen through women are just seen through the male lens, and that a woman's body is sexualized all the time. That's a big contributing factor, but much harder to talk about in really tangible terms.
Can I just ask, Anna, if we flip this around, are we seeing this in men's health at all? Are we seeing this when it comes to, erectile dysfunction, testicular cancer? Are we seeing it in the men's health space at all? Or is this more pervasive to women's health?
We see that it's disproportionate to women's health. And what's interesting is erectile dysfunction is called out specifically in the meta guidelines as being allowed. So as advertising or content, whereas the same is not applied on the women's health side of things. There's no equivalent applied there. And to give you an example, because the guidelines say that you can't advertise anything to do with sexual pleasure, when you might have a libido enhancing product or a vaginal dryness product for menopause, that kind of ends up getting categorized into sexual pleasure randomly. But of course, erectile dysfunction, you'll see ads all the time saying, time to have spontaneous sex. We can help you with, having spontaneous sex, which is for an erectile dysfunction product. But of course, that is blatantly about sexual pleasure.
I mean, are there any women's health areas that are disproportionately being censored? I know you've just touched on a couple of things there, kind of lubrication for vaginal dryness, etc. So are there any areas where we are seeing that it is almost like a wall that is being built for these content creators or businesses that you're seeing more through your research?
I'd say it's very difficult for anyone in the breast health, breast cancer, breastfeeding space, because naturally that involves the breast, and we know that that is completely sexualized as well. And so often we hear from one of our case studies, LactApp, it's a breastfeeding support app. They say, oh, we end up on the wrong side of social media in these feeds full of men that want to look at the breastfeeding imagery. And a lot of when social media platforms try to solve for this issue, they end up in a loophole where then you have adult content creators kind of creating what's clearly not breastfeeding content, but is performative breastfeeding. And so they use that as a loophole to have actual adult content on the social platform. So it's very difficult if you're in that area. Anything to do with sexual health is really problematic. Using the word vagina, vulva, anything to do with periods and menstruation is difficult. So yes, there's a lot of areas where it's very challenging.
So, I mean, I guess then the example that you just gave, Is it fair to say that these platforms also are caught a bit between a rock and a hard place too? Or do you think there's really room for these platforms to be doing much better?
We see there's absolutely room for them to do better. And what we'd love is for them to come to the table and engage with the women's health sector. And that's, I guess, one of our key asks with censorship is for that to happen. Some of the big areas that we feel that they could act on are creating routes for appeal so that you can actually challenge decisions. So, because if the mistakes are happening, how can you actually resolve that quickly rather than your account being down for days on end? We've seen ad accounts where they are restricted or removed, and of course, you lose all the learnings in your ad account then, and it can really damage your business. So, routes for appeal would be one area. Secondly, would be some more nuance and protection around women's health content. So, actually being more specific in the guidelines, engaging with the sector would be another key one, and looking at making sure that the guidelines that they do have are implemented more fairly. So that's possibly internal training for the moderators or some tweaks to the algorithm. I don't think it's for us to determine how they fix this, but actually to show some willingness to address it and prioritize it as well.
So I know you've just touched on then, Anna, about kind of people not being able to access their analytics as they would be able to, touched on advertising. What kind of impact is this having on businesses? Have you got any examples or case studies of kind of where this has been detrimental to someone's livelihood?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of our case studies has shared with us that they estimated they lost £500,000 in just a single year because of the censorship on their ad accounts. So that's a very clear damage. We've got others where, they're losing revenue, but it's not just revenue, it's the time and effort spent. So often you're a small up and coming startup with perhaps a solo marketer, or it's the founder themselves trying to build their business, and every pound counts. Every hour you spend in your business counts. You do not want to be spending hour after hour trying to get someone from Meta to help you get your Instagram back up and running. So there's those impacts as well. And I guess what we see is this direct correlation between what's happening with the social media censorship and the growth of the femtech industry. We're seeing this as a $60 billion business at the moment, hopefully growing to $100+ billion by 2030. That's the estimations. But if these businesses cannot grow through social media, which is such a core channel for any business that's direct to consumer, then how can it have that scale? And we've heard examples of businesses being asked in the pitch room with investors, well, how will you market yourselves if we know that you can't use social media in the way that other businesses in our portfolio do? So that's really concerning. And so how we think about it at censorship is almost this sort of life cycle of barriers that are in place between the funding gap, the research gap, and then your growth gap, which is the social media and the financial services that we'll come on to later as well.
Yeah. And we've talked about this before, Emma, as well. Just the other week, we were saying, ooh, how are we going to promote ourselves on social media? We're almost feeling like we need to jump through some hoops, maybe avoid some words, maybe present ourselves in a different way. And it's quite sad that we have to do that, for women's health, for a femtech podcast, but it's front of mind for us. We know that this is happening. So we're like, oh, how are we going to do this? How are we going to navigate the fact that it's a femtech podcast?
What's really interesting, I find really interesting, is some brands have chosen to kind of flip it and actually go tackle this head on. So you've got a brand like Bodyform, which has campaigned for years around censorship, and I would imagine has benefited commercially by being a spokesperson on the issue. They ran their 40 words campaign a few years ago, where they actually listed out 40 words that you can't say on social media. And, it's still talked about now. More recently, there's a brand called EvoFem, and they created a Save Vagina campaign, and that was all over LinkedIn and Instagram. And they then reported the results of that campaign, and actually drove an increase in visits to their website and brand lookups on Google, etc., which is fantastic. If we can actually raise awareness of this issue and help the women's health businesses to benefit at the same time, let's do it.
I mean, do we think that maybe some of these social media companies are missing a trick here? Is it not that there's a space actually for someone to be taking the lead on this and marketing themselves as the female-friendly platform, especially when we're 51% of the population? And some of these terms are just purely anatomical terms. We're not kind of dipping our toe into anything that's kind of particularly controversial. But you would think that one of these bigger companies would champion themselves to be a leader in this space, especially, as you say, with this ever growing market and the potential for ad revenue for some of these big companies that are coming onto the scene.
100%. I mean, that's the opportunity right there for them. And I suppose we've seen some efforts from social platforms to address the health misinformation gap. So YouTube's brought in their health shelf so that, it's really marked clearly who you're hearing from to make sure that it's credible information, which is great. And we'd love them to, go a step further and really delve into women's health more specifically. It's definitely a priority issue. And I suppose when you've got the competing force of, say, the Online Safety Act and, also the political landscape of a support for women's rights, it all plays into who's making this a priority for the social media platforms. And that's why, initiatives like Censorship are here to try and keep banging that drum week after week, day after day, to say, look, this is the opportunity. We're here to help you solve it.
Yeah,
I
it's
mean,
brilliant.
Anna, you took the initiative as well, didn't you, as censorship to do this white paper? And I think we'd really like to dig a bit more into that and just more about kind of how you undertook that challenge and some of the key insights that you've gained from that. Because obviously that's a big undertaking from yourselves, but critical in this discussion.
Yes. So the white paper we released in June of this year, and we've been so grateful to partner with The Case for Her, which is a Swedish blended investment firm. And they've been a fantastic support for us. We couldn't have done this work this year, last year without them. And so the white paper was really an effort to bring together everything we'd learned over the previous year, because we were having people come to us and say, can you just summarize everything you've researched, and if you've got anything that explains actually what censorship is, etc. So we decided to bring it all together into one key asset, and that's the white paper. So it's got all of our case studies in there, but an explanation of how we see censorship, and what its impacts are, and then the recommendations as well.
So you just touched on recommendations, Anna. What are they? What are the things that, I think we've kind of briefly alluded to them, but if you had a key strategy for people moving forward, what would that, include?
So for the platforms, we look at this as a long-term partnership, and we'd love them to come to the table with censorship and the women's health sector, protect women's health content, make sure the policies that they do have are applied fairly and objectively, and then improve that appeals and transparency route, because that's the major issue that's frustrating companies. So we've got one of the case studies that we work with, and they've been dealing with an issue with Meta since January this year, and it's still not fully been resolved. And that's having an extremely detrimental impact on their business. And you might have, if you're big enough as an account, you might have an account manager, but often that's just over email, or you might have a, ad hoc meeting here and there, but often they aren't able to give you fuller answers, and they aren't able to escalate the issue either. So we really think there's something that can be done around that area in particular. And then what we really like to see as well is policymakers and regulators pushing for that action as well. So what's happened in Europe is that we have the Digital Services Act. Now, this came in a couple of years ago, and it means that there is a route for appeal for you if you feel like your social media content is being censored. We don't have any similar regulation here in the UK. So if you want to escalate an issue, there's actually nowhere that you can go to. You can go to Ofcom, but there's no real dedicated appeals route through Ofcom. They will not respond to individual complaints. So we think that's an opportunity as well. And we've got a parliamentary roundtable next week or the week after with ST and some cross-party MPs, and we are hoping to table that really there as well.
So would that be almost like an ombudsman service, Anna, that people could go to if they felt that their complaints hadn't been taken seriously elsewhere?
Exactly. It's a second set of eyes to help review issues, but also call upon the platforms to really prioritize them and review them properly, because that's what's not happening at the moment.
And I know that you've touched as well on finance. Could you elaborate a little bit more about kind of censorship and finance? I think there's a lot of our listeners who want to know more on that aspect.
Yeah, so when we first started censorship, we did a couple of focus groups with founders in the space, and we were talking a lot about social media censorship and hearing their experiences. And someone put up their hand and they said, this is not just social media censorship, it's happening across financial services and service providers too. And we were like, okay, what do you mean? And they shared an example of where they tried to get some business insurance for their startup, bought an off-the-shelf product for a few £100s, and 4 months later, their insurance was just cancelled out of nowhere. They managed to get on the phone to someone and were told that they didn't meet the values or the ethics of the insurance provider. So, of course, they said, well, can you share what those values and ethics are so that we can see how we don't fit in there? And they were told they're not written down, but you just don't fit our criteria. And so they had to go elsewhere for their insurance. So again, this triggered in us desire to really look into this issue and see what's happening here. So last year we did some research, spoke to around 30 founders and organizations, and 100% of them reported this same level of bias across their bank accounts, business insurance, payment providers, payment processors. So examples where you're just getting debanked for working in the industry because you happen to mention sexual health or sexual wellness as part of what you're doing, turn down business insurance because your female hormone product or something that you're doing to do with pregnancy has just not got the right underwriting in place because they don't understand the women's health space enough. Or it could be a payment provider that just pulls your service right before a campaign that you're running, again, because it doesn't feel like your products align with the reputation of the company. So it was a huge eye-opener for us. That research was published in The Guardian in August last year. And we are just finalising a new report now, actually, that looks into that in more detail. We've been interviewing founders in more depth. We have been speaking to some risk experts in the financial space to really give us that holistic view across what's happening and why this might be happening. And the report's due out later this month, so November 2025. And I suppose to conclude what we've found out with this, it's a positive because I feel like this has been quite a depressing conversation so far. So I want to bring a bit of light because the social media piece is a real long-term challenge, right? It's not going to change overnight. The financial services issue is one that is so solvable because what it really comes down to is a lack of understanding about women's health. If we could build that education within those service providers to then update their policies, set that culture from the top down, educate staff so that you can pick up the phone to your customer and learn about what they are selling and what they do and not categorize them as porn adjacent, then we can solve this. So it's there, it's structural, but it's out of all these things, it's kind of a quick win. And that's what we hope to really put forward with this new research, and some exciting news as well from censorship of what we are planning to do about this. We next year are also launching the femtech, which is going to be a world first accreditation for those service providers that have done that work, that do get it, that want to work with the growing femtech industry and want to be a first mover in this space. So we will take them through our process. They'll have the femtech badge to denote then to founders that they are a safe space and want to work with you. And so we hope this can really be a bit of a solution for what's happening. And we're really proud of
Definitely.
being able to do something that's within our control. And
Mm.
we've been having some brilliant conversations with service providers that are like, yeah, count us in. We'd love to see this.
Excellent. That's so smart. That's so smart for so many reasons. So I love it. Even from the punny word femtech. I mean, the whole way through, the whole thing is smart. So it's brilliant.
Cleo
Like brilliant work.
is the master of coming up with good names. She came up with the name Censorship. She came up with the name Femtech, and I love both of them. So
They're
Yeah,
brilliant.
amazing
And that's
marketing. She's done
amazing
a great
work.
job there.
Yeah, for sure. And then
Yeah.
should we touch quickly on the newsletter as well, Anna? If you tell us a
yeah,
little bit more about what your vision was, I guess, around that, and maybe you could tell us a few of the trends that you're seeing, because I guess you're quite in the know if you've got a newsletter about all things, future female health. It'd be great to
sure.
know what you've got your eye on and what we should all be keeping an eye on.
So I set up Future FemHealth a few years ago when I decided, after my own IVF experiences and having suddenly got my eyes open to the gender health gap in my mid-30s, I set this newsletter up because I was like, I want to get a job in a women's health company. My background's PR and communications. I'd spent 20 years working in different sorts of corporate roles. So I thought, I need to build some sort of understanding of women's health, right, if I want to get a job there. And again, it's sort of snowballed from there to its own thing. And I've left my corporate job in the meantime to now work just on Future FemHealth and censorship, which is I actually love doing. But yes, it's a global newsletter looking at women's health innovation and femtech. So we share a weekly briefing looking at the new ideas in the space, the funding, who's giving the money, who's investing, etc. And some of these policy pieces as well, because I think it's all so interrelated. And what I try to do with the newsletter is not just share headlines about so and so's got this much or this has been launched, but actually connect the dots for people and help them to understand where the progress is happening, where the opportunities are, and where it's all moving. Because I think by doing that, I see media as such an important infrastructure for this space. By doing that, we can all move much faster and much further together. So that was the original mission for it. And as I say, I left my corporate job just in the summer. So it's really now finding the time and headspace to look at where I want to take Future FemHealth. We're up to about 9,000 subscribers now in nearly 100 countries. So I'd really like to continue building that and looking at how it evolves. Trends. Great
Mm,
question. So, what am I looking at? So, I would say firstly would be continuous hormone monitoring. I think
mm-hmm.
that's a really exciting space. There's a company called Level Zero, and they say that they can reduce the blood draws during IVF by 80%. So, as I mentioned, I went through IVF and was having to run out of work, every other day to then travel across London to get to the hospital to have my bloods taken to monitor how I was going. If we can save people that time and energy and the emotional turmoil when you're going through IVF as well, I think it's just incredible. And there's so many applications for continuous hormone monitoring. Um, there's a lot going on, I think, with female cancers that I'm really excited about. So, we've seen all these at-home diagnostics, especially for cervical screening, which is brilliant to see. And one that I'm really excited about for womb cancer. So my mum passed away from womb cancer, so that's one that's really close to my heart. And there's a swab test that the Eva Pill, which is a charity, has funded the development for. So I'm excited to see that progress. Slightly more controversially, I'd say GLP-1s as well, and how they can be applied in women's health, because I know the evidence is not there yet, but I think there's a lot of early signs that what they've done for weight loss, we're just only at the tip of the iceberg for what they can do for all sorts of things in women's health. I ran a poll in Future FemHealth recently, and there was very, very mixed opinions about whether we should be talking about GLP-1s and women's health in the same breath. So I know it is very divisive, but I'm going to go with it. And then finally, I'd say some of the less sexy areas of women's health. So there's a company I'm about to interview in the next few weeks called Cosm Medical. They're out of Canada, and they do 3D pessaries, print on demand, right? So apparently 30% of pessaries, when you go in for a prolapse, later fail because they're just not the right fit, they're not comfortable enough, and the woman just then can't wear them. Whereas with the personalised pessaries, they've got around 10 million variations on the pessary. And I'm all for the founders that are solving for women's pain and dignity. And I think when you can make such a difference in a woman's life for something like prolapse or leakage, etc., it's just, brilliant to see.
I think that's an amazing innovation. As someone who has fitted many pessaries, like you say, if you've got a pessary that isn't fitting properly, it can irritate the vaginal wall, especially on a mucosa that's postmenopausal. That irritation, it can cause bleeding, it can cause apprehension for that next fit of a pessary. We all know if you're anxious and you're nervous, your pelvic muscles are all going to be super tense, and it can be a really uncomfortable fit, and you're getting this really vicious cycle. But for a condition that's actually really irritating for women, that in some women, they're not a candidate for surgery for whatever reason that is. So although it might not sound like a particularly glamorous or really exciting kind of technology, it's really important for these women for a very common problem, which women don't come forward enough about. That's the tech we need. That's the kind of stuff, isn't it? That actually we need more people thinking, this is a really common problem. This is something that's happening all the time. What's the solution to this? And it doesn't have to be a super AI driven. It's just solving a problem that needs to be solved. And I think that's what an amazing idea. 3D, it
I
sounds
agree.
simple. Amazing.
It's cool, isn't it? Personalized pessaries. I absolutely love it. And finally putting 3D printers to some decent use. I mean, I've only heard of a few cases where people are using them actually for something useful rather than generating little mini-me's of themselves. I don't know why. So this sounds fabulous, a fabulous use of that tech.
Definitely. So with regards to kind of the newsletter, Anna, it'd be great for people to know kind of where can they follow you. Also, if there's anyone, I suppose, we've got a number of founders or companies that might be listening, is how they approach you if they want to share with you their 3D pessaries or otherwise, how can they get in touch?
Yes, please. So we're at futurefemhealth.com. That's on Substack, and you'll find all my details in there. Find me on LinkedIn, Anna O'Sullivan. And of course, on the censorship side, it's censorship.co.uk/white/paper if you want to read out white paper. And again, you'll find us on LinkedIn and Instagram, as long as we're not getting shadow banned.
Fantastic. Well, we can put that in the show notes as well, Anna, and kind of well done on everything that you're doing. And thank you so much for championing women's health in all these areas where we need to make progress and where we're doing women a disservice.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Anna.
Thanks. Bye.
Bye.
Thanks for being here. We love having you with us on this journey through women's health and innovation.
Follow us on Instagram at the Pink Pineapple Podcast for clips, conversations, and the latest in women's health and femtech.
We'll see you next week. Same pineapple, new topic. Everything we talk about on the Pink Pineapple Podcast is here to inform and inspire, but it's not a substitute for professional medical advice. If you're worried about your health, please reach out to your GP or healthcare provider.